say arts, especially ancient arts, let it be objects or paintings or whatever, as long as they're ancient arts, they should be housed in museums where everyone can enjoy and not be auctioned off into the hands of the few rich people. What would you say to that?
Well, I'm an academic, so there's arguments both sides. Unfortunately, in some parts of the world, there is insufficient appetite or insufficient funds for governments to look after those objects. So if you go to certain countries, India, for instance, the museum sector in India is woefully underfunded. And so if private collectors weren't looking after things, these things would just disappear. These things would be, left and neglected. The role of a museum in pure terms is to, preserve what we have now, whether it's old or new, or preserve what we have now for the future, so future generations can benefit. But that's a rich man's sport, because some countries are facing probably more difficulties than I know. Let's look after these old relics. They're probably, I know, let's, buy more military materials so that we can defend ourselves against our aggressive neighbours.
Right.
Let's buy more food so we can feed our people. Let's buy more medicine. So actually, some countries rely upon wealthy benefactors to actually help to preserve their histories. So I think in a pure world, yes, museums should be able to be the final arbiters of this and should hold all the things. But in reality, it's very useful to have rich people doing it as well.
What would be your advice for anyone who wants to become a collector, contemporary, modern, or ancient arts? What would be some of the basic knowledge that he or she should have?
First of all, you have to be, right, don't buy for short-term investment. People buy art. The only way to make money from art is if your parents buy it. So you buy art so your children can benefit. Because until we get these bubbles arriving, the general holding period for art was 22 years. Studies done certainly in the West. And it's 22 years for a reason. And it's, you leave school, you leave school, you go to college, you leave college, you get a job, you get married, you buy a house, you have kids, you send them to college, so on and so on. And eventually, you have money that you can spend on what you want, which might be art. 22 years later, you die and your children sell it. And so that's the holding period, was always about 22 years, because your children benefit from it. So my advice would be buy art that you can live with, and buy art that you are happy with. Try to focus on something, and focus on something that is of interest and resonates to you. Most people start collecting locally. They collect art from where they are. So Indonesians collect Indonesian art, Chinese collect Chinese art. It's only after you've built up that level of collection that you might then start looking at other types of art. That you might look beyond your own cultural, and not necessarily national, but cultural boundaries into other areas. Because appreciating the aesthetic of art and developing that sense of an eye for that aesthetic and the beauty is actually a long job. It takes a long time, and you really have to be interested. It's like a hobby. Right. Treat it as a hobby. People collect stamps and they know everything about the stamps and all the history about the stamps, and they're passionate about it. That's how you should treat art. Not, well, I'm rich enough and I feel I should collect art. How do I do it? Yeah. That's the wrong attitude. It should speak to you. Otherwise, you could be spending a lot of money and not knowing why, and not really appreciating it. So that's the key thing. Be interested, but don't expect to get rich. If anybody's going to get rich, it's going to be your children. That would be my advice.
Remember, don't buy art for short-term investment. You will benefit from the arts that your parents collected, and your children will benefit from your collection. So, as Phil said, be passionate about what you want to collect and buy art that you are happy to live with. See you next week. สวัสดีค่ะ